The music inside the lakeside ballroom bounced off glass and chrome, but what I remember most is the way his hand looked under the uplight's gold watch gleaming as his fingers traced the hem of her dress. Andrew had insisted on a grand 40th. He wanted donors' clients and a camera-ready view of Lake Michigan. I wanted to believe we were still us. Tessa tilted her head and laughed a little too brightly, the kind of laugh that tries to make sin sound like a joke. I stood 10 steps away, invisible, until I wasn't the sweetness of her perfume cutting through the champagne. He glanced up and met my eyes as if I were an interruption, not a wife. The band kept playing, but the room had already shifted. Some people turned away, others didn't bother. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if stories about quiet justice help you sleep a little easier, tap like and subscribe so more women can find their way back to dignity. My name is Julia Hart, and I grew up in a house where budgets were balanced and promises were kept. My father taught middle school math. My mother ran a bakery so small, the cinnamon stuck to your coat on the way out. We weren't flashy, but we were steady, and steady felt like love. Andrew was the kind of campus legend who could talk a professor into extra time and a landlord into a discount. And I was the girl who color-coded her notebooks and knew the difference between cash flow and profit. He said my calm made him brave. I thought his brave would always make room for my calm. When his graduate program nearly swallowed our savings, I pulled extra shifts and told myself it was temporary. When he pitched his first agency, I wrote the checks from the account my mother left me, promising myself it was an investment in our shared life. We married in a church with creaking pews and moved into a duplex with radiator heat that hissed all winter, and for a while the work felt purposeful. He built the shell I filled in the structure. I set up payroll-coded expenses and reminded him that growth eats cash before it feeds it. He grinned at ribbon cuttings and smiled on panels. I paid the vendors and kept the lights on. When Lily was born, a promotion slid across my desk like a gift I wasn't allowed to open, and I handed it back with a thank you. We agreed it was a season. I told myself seasons pass. From the outside, our life looked like a catalog: the tidy brick house in Wauwatosa, the grill on the patio, the framed first day of school photos lined up along the hallway. Inside, the calendar got crowded with strategy dinners, and I learned that late nights have a smell cologne mixed with hotel air and the faintest trace of someone else's shampoo. I reminded myself that entrepreneurs live on adrenaline and caffeine. I didn't want to be the wife who turned questions into accusations. When Tessa came on board, the office felt sharper and quicker, and Andrew said she was a lifesaver who spoke fluent chaos. I believed him because believing him made everything simpler. If I'm honest, the first hairline fractures were easy to ignore because they hid inside our ordinary new passwords on old devices. A second phone he called temporary charges labeled client hospitality that looked more like celebration than sales. I told myself context matters, and the context was growth. I told myself that love needs trust the way buildings need beams. But beams rot quietly. A month before the party, I found a sticky note in the laundry with a hotel name and a time that didn't match any calendar invite. I folded it into my pocket and called it a coincidence. A week later, Lily asked why Dad needed so many late meetings, and I said grown-up jobs were weird. The lie tasted like metal. The night of the gala, I zipped my dress with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and promised myself I would not make a scene. I stood by the windows long enough to watch the sun slide down into the lake, then turned to find him. That was when the laughter split the crowd and the room parted just enough to show me what I was refusing to see. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the glass. I said his name like a sentence, and every conversation around us fell one notch quieter. He smoothed his expression the way he smooths a tie before an interview, and for a breath, it almost worked. I didn't know then that the videos would travel faster than apologies, or that whispers could become wind. I only knew that humiliation is a kind of heat, and that I wasn't going to burn alone. I left before dessert heels ticking across marble like a metronome, and out on the sidewalk, the lake air felt colder than December. My phone lit up, and the first message wasn't pity. It was proof. A bank alert blinked across the screen, another hospitality charge that didn't belong to any client on their roster time-stamped while I stood under chandeliers. I steadied my breathing and scrolled again. The next notification wasn't a receipt. It was a photo sent by a number I recognized but hadn't saved, the kind of friend who doesn't use the word friend out loud. In the frame, Andrew wasn't laughing. He was careless. Tessa wasn't laughing either. She was looking straight into the camera like she finally understood what it means to be seen. I didn't open the second image right away. I saved it, pressed call, and listened to the first ring stretch out like a warning I could no longer ignore. The night after the gala, sleep never came. I lay in bed, with my phone still glowing, each notification slicing through the dark like a tiny blade. Screenshots from acquaintances, clips of the ballroom, and receipts I had never seen before arrived in steady waves. What I had witnessed with my own eyes was more than enough, but the proof piling up in my hand left no room for denial. Betrayal doesn't always crash down in one moment. It creeps, it layers, and then it suffocates. By morning, I felt like I had been living under its weight for years, even though the truth had only just cut through the surface. Andrew tried to reach me before the sun was fully up. His name flashed again, and when I didn't answer, the voicemail started. At first, his voice was polished, practiced the same tone he used with board members. "Julia, call me back. We need to present a united front." By the third message, the veneer cracked. "Don't embarrass me like this. You're making it worse." I deleted them one by one, because I had no interest in hearing him try to spin a story that was already burned into every screen in Milwaukee. The real breaking point hadn't come at the ballroom. It came a week earlier in our own house when Lily whispered something I couldn't forget. She had been FaceTiming me from her room, showing me a sketch of a sunflower she was proud of. Then her voice fell into a hush, and her eyes darted toward the hallway. "Mom," she said, barely moving her lips. "Dad's in his office with Tessa. They're hugging. He told me not to tell you." Her small hand trembled as she held the phone. In that moment, everything in me snapped. I closed her door quietly that night, gathered her in my arms, and felt her ribs against mine. As I promised, it wasn't her job to keep my secrets. I told her it was mine to keep hers, and I meant it. Protecting her meant ending the lie, no matter how much it cost me. Andrew's betrayal was no longer just about me. It was about the example I was setting for my daughter. If I stayed silent, I was teaching her that silence was love. If I looked away, I was teaching her that betrayal was normal. I couldn't let that be the blueprint of her future. When I finally sat at the kitchen table the next morning, my brother Noah was already waiting. He didn't bring coffee or bagels. He just leaned forward with his arms folded and studied me. The videos had reached him before I even thought to call. For a long while, he said nothing, just let the silence fill the space between us. Then he spoke in that quiet, firefighter way of his, calm in crisis. "You don't need to explain anymore, Jules. The city saw it." He exposed himself. "Now you decide what comes next." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. His words were both comfort and command. For years, I had been carrying the burden of proof alone, trapped in the cycle of gaslighting and apologies. One quiet sentence from my brother was enough to remind me who I used to be before Andrew's charm and ambition blurred my sense of truth. That morning, I believed I could take back control, not only because Noah said so, but because Lily deserved to see it. The house felt different in the daylight. The kitchen chairs we bought together, the photographs on the wall, Even the scent of brewed coffee seemed tainted by the memory of what he had done. Betrayal doesn't just live in actions, it seeps into objects, into routines, until nothing feels untouched. I walked from room to room like a guest in my own home, cataloging each sacrifice I had made to keep us afloat. The night shifts, the inheritance checks, the career I placed on hold so his dream could grow. It all added up to the same truth: without me, Andrew would have had nothing to stand on. By noon, I finally turned on my phone again. Messages stacked on top of each other, some sympathetic, some gleeful, some cruel. I scrolled until I found a thread of screenshots. Dinner reservations, hotel bookings, charges at places he never told me about. And then there were the transfers to Tessa. Venmo notes filled with champagne glasses and heart emojis. He hadn't even been careful. He thought I would never look. Or worse, he thought I would never leave. Andrew called again that evening. I answered this time not because I wanted to hear him, but because I wanted to mark the sound of his voice against what I knew. Julia. He said, his tone a mix of anger and pleading. This is out of control. People are exaggerating. It was one mistake blown out of proportion. You can't let our family get dragged through this. I almost laughed at the word family, the word he wielded like a shield. Our family, I said evenly, is already dragged through this. And you're the one who pulled us. He stammered, trying to regain control, but I ended the call before he could. That night, Lily crawled into my bed. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She just pressed her head into my shoulder the way she used to when she was little, and I stroked her hair until she fell asleep. I lay awake, listening to her breathing, feeling the weight of what I had to do settle into my bones. Leaving the gala wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I stared at the ceiling until morning light crept in, then whispered 3 words out loud, words that changed everything. No more Julia. Saying it broke something loose inside me. I was no longer the woman caught off guard in a ballroom. I was no longer the wife being told she was paranoid. I was the mother of a daughter who deserved better. And I was the woman who was ready to end the lie once and for all. The very next call I made wasn't to Andrew. It was to Dana Whitaker, a lawyer recommended by one of Noah's colleagues. Her voice on the other end was brisk, steady, and sharp. I saw the video, she said without hesitation. Half the city has. Do you want to move forward? My answer came without pause. Yes. Divorce. Custody. And I want my assets protected. Her reply was simple. Then start gathering. Records, texts, emails. Don't delete anything, and don't let him know what you're doing. Her words rang like orders, and I took them seriously. I pulled file drawers from the office, opened every email account, and printed every bank statement I could find. I gathered my inheritance records checks I had written to fund his business and cross-referenced them with his firm's expenses. By midday, the floor was covered in proof that my sacrifices had been real and his betrayal deliberate. Each piece of paper wasn't just evidence, it was another stone in the foundation of my resolve. When I finally closed the laptop and stacked the folders, I felt a quiet shift. For years, Andrew had convinced me that I was the one who needed him. But the numbers told another story. I had been the one carrying us, building us, and saving us. And now those same numbers would be the key to undoing him. I boxed the files and slid them into the closet, locking the door before heading upstairs to check on Lily. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, sketching in her notebook, her hair falling into her eyes. When she looked up, I saw something that broke me more than his betrayal ever could fear. Fear that I would collapse, that I would give in again, that I would let him rewrite the story. I sat beside her, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and whispered, "We're okay. I promise you, we're okay." But deep down, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Andrew had always underestimated me, always counted on my silence. He didn't realize yet that silence was the one thing I had buried for good. And as I turned off the light in Lily's room, I felt the first stirrings of something stronger than grief resolve. Part of me dreaded the fight ahead, but another part, the one he had tried to bury under years of gaslighting, was ready for it. Because I knew the next time Andrew walked through that front door, he wouldn't be facing the wife he thought he could control. He would be facing someone he had never seen before. I heard the sound of keys scraping against the lock before I even reached the bottom of the stairs. Andrew's footsteps were heavy, uneven, as if he was carrying anger on his shoulders. When he pushed the door open, his tie hung loose, and his face was blotchy from drink or rage, maybe both. He slammed the door behind him hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded. His voice filled the entryway sharp and accusing before I had even spoken a word. I didn't move from the kitchen doorway. A box half filled with Lily's school projects sat at my feet, tape waiting to seal it. I pressed the roll of tape flat on the counter and met his stare. "What are you talking about?" I asked evenly. His hand came up, waving his card at me like evidence. "My corporate account was declined, at lunch, with clients. Do you know how humiliating that was?" He jabbed his finger in the air close enough that I could feel the heat of his frustration. The calm in my voice surprised even me. "Oh, you were embarrassed. That must have been unbearable." His face twisted as if I had slapped him. He shoved his hands through his hair and stepped closer. "Don't play games with me, Julia. You froze the accounts, didn't you? You're sabotaging everything." I straightened, lifting my chin so our eyes met at the same level. "No, Andrew. You sabotaged everything when you thought you could humiliate me in front of 100 people and still come home to a compliant wife." His jaw flexed, and his eyes darted toward the hallway where Lily's door was cracked. I saw the panic flicker across his face when he realized she might hear us. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, lowering his tone but not his fury. "She doesn't need to know the details." The words came out of me sharper than I intended. "She already knows. She saw you, Andrew. She's been keeping your secrets for you, and that ends tonight." For the first time in years, his posture faltered. The smirk that usually came to his rescue didn't appear. His shoulders slumped slightly, and his voice lost its edge. "Julia, let's just slow down. We can fix this. I'll fire Tessa. I'll end it." It was a mistake. I shook my head slowly, the corners of my mouth tightening. You can't unring a bell. And you can't pretend your mistake hasn't been on every phone screen in the city. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I watched him search my face, desperate for a crack, a hint of the woman who once forgave without hesitation. But I was no longer standing in that role. I walked past him, opened the front door, and let the night air spill inside. "You need to leave," I said quietly. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment I thought he might refuse. Then, with a final slam that shook the walls, he stormed out. When the echo of his departure faded, I leaned against the door chest, rising and falling in deep, steady breaths. My hands trembled as the adrenaline ebbed, but then something unexpected spread across my face. A smile. It was faint, almost foreign, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I felt like the ground under me belonged to me again. The next 48 hours unfolded like a chain reaction I had set in motion. Andrew's card was declined again, this time at a client dinner. Word traveled back to me through a friend whose husband worked at the same table. The waiter had asked loud enough for others to hear if he wanted to try another form of payment, Andrew left red-faced, abandoning half-finished plates and half-earned respect. By morning, his messages shifted from angry to pleading. "Unfreeze the accounts, Julia. You're ruining us. Please." Each text lit my screen, but I didn't answer. Let him sit in the discomfort of consequences. Meanwhile, the videos from the gala spread beyond Milwaukee. They landed on LinkedIn, TikTok. Even the local news hinted at a scandal surrounding a prominent businessman. Tessa's face was caught in half the clips, and by the end of the week, her social media had gone private. I imagined her walking through the office coworkers, whispering, wondering how long she could keep her head up. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me reclaiming what was mine, my dignity, my daughter's safety, and the truth. The women in my circle reached out in private messages. Some I barely knew, but they sent screenshots of group chats where Andrew had become the punchline. Others wrote simply, "We're behind you." Their words didn't erase the pain, but they reminded me I wasn't as alone as he had tried to make me feel. One evening, Lily came home quieter than usual. She set her backpack down carefully and lingered near the kitchen counter. "Dad called me at lunch," she said, her voice hesitant. I put down the knife I was using to slice apples and gave her my full attention. "What did he say?" She fiddled with the strap of her bag, eyes fixed on the floor. "He asked if I wanted to stay with him this weekend. He sounded scared." Her eyes lifted to mine, steady and clear. "I told him no. I told him I wanted to stay here." Her words struck me deeper than any court ruling ever could. My daughter wasn't fooled by his excuses or his charm. She had made her choice, and it aligned with the truth we were living inside these walls. I pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." She nodded, slipping her arms around my waist. In that embrace, I felt both the fragility of her childhood and the strength she carried beyond her years. That night, I called Noah and filled him in on the latest. He listened without interruption, then said what I already knew in my gut. "He's unraveling Jules, but don't ease up. Keep the pressure. He deserves every ounce of it." I agreed. This wasn't about vengeance alone. It was about balance. Every sacrifice I had made was written in those bank statements and receipts, and now they would serve as the record of his undoing. Still, Andrew wasn't finished trying to claw back control. Late one night, his pounding at the door shook me from sleep. I pulled on a robe and opened it to find him disheveled, his suit wrinkled, and his eyes bloodshot. "You're destroying me," he rasped. "Do you understand that clients are leaving? Tessa's threatening to sue. My name is being dragged through the mud. You've turned my life into chaos." I held the doorframe and looked at him with the steadiness he couldn't match. "No, Andrew. You destroyed yourself. I'm just letting the world see what I've been living with for years." His mouth opened, ready to argue, but nothing came out. His eyes darted around, searching for an anchor, a foothold, anything he could use. Finding nothing, he stepped closer, lowering his voice into a hiss. "You'll regret this, Julia." I met his glare without flinching. "The only regret I have is not starting sooner." I closed the door firmly, turned the lock, and leaned into the silence. On the other side, I heard his fists hit the wood once, twice, then nothing. Lily peeked from her doorway, her hair tousled from sleep. "Is he gone?" she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, he's gone." I tucked her back into bed, brushing her hair from her forehead until her breathing slowed. Then I sat in the dim hallway light, listening to the quiet house that no longer felt haunted by his presence. The man I had once loved was already gone. What remained was only the fallout, and I was no longer afraid to face it. When Elaine called, her voice carried the kind of strain that comes from keeping appearances polished. She wanted me to come to dinner with Andrew, his parents, and his brother. For Lily's sake, she added as if my daughter's name were a key that might unlock my compliance. I almost refused, but then I realized something. This dinner wasn't a trap, it was a stage. And if Andrew wanted to act like the respectable family man, I would make sure the curtain rose on the truth. The restaurant was crowded when Lily and I arrived, a Friday night rush that left little room for secrets. We were seated at a long table near the center where every passerby could see us. Andrew sat stiffly, his shirt crisp, his posture rehearsed, while Tessa occupied the chair beside him. Her smile was brittle, darting at every pair of eyes that landed on her. I slid into my seat, Lily close by my side, and folded my napkin onto my lap. Andrew leaned forward, his grin spreading across the table like a politician greeting voters. "Julia, thank you for coming. I think it's important we show the family and Emily that we can handle this like adults." He glanced toward Lily, using the wrong name, and my daughter's face darkened. I didn't correct him. His father cleared his throat, the sound stern enough to silence conversation. "Son, this scandal is tarnishing everything we've invested in. You need to take responsibility before there's nothing left to salvage." Andrew's voice tightened, though he kept it smooth for the table. "That's exactly what I want to do. I'll admit I've made mistakes, but freezing our accounts and dragging private matters into the open, Julia, that's going too far." I let him finish, then leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. My voice was calm, steady, loud enough for the nearby tables to catch every word. "Too far? You cheated on your wife with your assistant in front of an entire ballroom. I'm just cleaning up the wreckage you created." The restaurant fell into a hush. Forks hovered midair, and even the waiter froze halfway to another table. Color drained from Tessa's face, and she tried to slip her hand into Andrew's under the table. He pulled away quickly, embarrassed, and that small movement said more than any denial could. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table. "Would you like me to show them the receipts? The hotel charges the transfers with champagne emojis? Or should we just play the viral video that everyone has already seen?" Elaine gasped, her hand flying to her chest, while David muttered under his breath, "Jesus, Andrew." Richard sat back, disappointment carved into every line of his face. Andrew reached for my phone, panic sparking in his eyes, but I held it just out of reach. "No, Andrew. This isn't just between us anymore. You humiliated me publicly, so I'll return the favor. Everyone here deserves to see the man behind the performance." A ripple of whispers spread around the restaurant. Someone at a nearby table lifted their phone, the screen tilted just enough to capture the scene unfolding. Tessa's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. "I'm not doing this," she said, her voice tight and unsteady. "I didn't sign up to be destroyed along with you." Without waiting for a reply, she grabbed her purse and walked quickly toward the exit, her heels clicking in sharp rhythm until the door closed behind her. The silence she left was heavy. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Andrew. "You can spin it however you want, but the truth is out. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everyone who believed in you." The words landed hard, and I could see the phrase repeating itself in the whispers of those around us. His father shook his head. His mother covered her face with her napkin, and his brother stared down at the table, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. I stood, slowly smoothed my dress, and placed the napkin neatly on the table. "You built your reputation on lies. I'm just making sure people see it clearly." With Lily's hand in mine, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving Andrew alone in the center of the wreckage he had created. The fallout came faster than I expected. 2 days later, Andrew appeared on local television, sitting stiffly in a studio chair. His hair was combed, His suit pressed his voice, trembling just enough to seem believable. "I'm a husband and a father first," he said, leaning toward the camera. "My wife has been struggling, and unfortunately, some misunderstandings were made public. I ask the community to respect our privacy while I focus on repairing my family." I watched from my living room, fists clenched, as he twisted the narrative. Misunderstanding, personal struggles. He was painting me as unstable, jealous, vindictive. The comments beneath the interview stoked my fears. People sympathized with him, called him composed, even admirable. For a moment, panic clawed at my chest. What if people believed him? What if the sympathy turned his way? Then I remembered the file folders stacked in my closet, filled with hotel records, bank statements, and messages. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to a journalist Noah had once introduced me to. I attached everything, every receipt, every screenshot, every transfer. At the bottom, I typed one sentence: "This isn't about privacy. This is about truth." The story broke within hours. Headlines appeared across local news sites. "Businessman's misunderstandings exposed. Affair receipts tell another story." Screenshots splashed across feeds comparing his carefully worded interview with evidence that spoke louder. A hashtag began to trend: "Receipts don't lie." Public opinion shifted as quickly as it had tilted in his favor. "He really tried to gaslight the entire city," one comment read. "She deserves better." Another simply said, "Imagine blaming her personal struggles while sneaking off to hotels." By evening, someone had clipped my line from the restaurant. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everyone who believed in you," and paired it with images of the receipts. The video spread overnight, racking up views and resharing across platforms. Teenagers mocked him in lip syncs. Local leaders quoted the line as if it were a lesson. "My words, not his," became the caption to his downfall. The next morning, Lily sat beside me on the couch, scrolling on her tablet. She grinned as she showed me the screen. "Mom, you're trending." I didn't want fame, but power was another matter. For once, the narrative wasn't his to control. It belonged to the truth. Meanwhile, Andrew's firm began to bleed clients. No company wanted its name tied to a scandal that had become entertainment. His partners released a statement distancing themselves, calling his actions a betrayal of professional ethics and community trust. Tessa released a shaky video of her own tears streaking her face, claiming she had been manipulated. Whether she believed it or not didn't matter. She wasn't standing beside him anymore. By the end of that week, Andrew's world had begun to collapse. The man who once shook hands with confidence now couldn't walk into a coffee shop without whispers following him. He deleted his social media accounts, but screenshots live forever. And the best part, I didn't have to keep pushing. The public carried the torch for me. The public had already done more damage to Andrew's image than I could have planned, but I knew humiliation wasn't the same as justice. People forget scandals eventually, and I wasn't going to rely on gossip to keep him down. Courtrooms, records, and signatures carried more weight than hashtags. That was where I needed to shift my focus. Dana and I sat across from one another in her office, the early morning sun cutting across the neat stacks of paper on her desk. She slid a thick folder toward me, her expression as calm as if she were talking about a grocery list. "We're not just filing for divorce," she said, her tone measured and steady. "We're dismantling him piece by piece." I opened the folder and saw my inheritance checks, the receipts for hotel rooms, and messages that spelled out betrayal in digital ink. Each document felt heavier than paper should. It was proof lined up in rows and paragraphs, a story the court couldn't ignore. The first hearing arrived faster than I expected. I walked into the courtroom wearing a navy suit, every detail chosen to remind myself I was in control. Andrew sat at the other table, his jacket wrinkled, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders pulled in, as if he hoped the bench could swallow him whole. When the judge sifted through the evidence, pausing at the inheritance checks and the messages filled with hearts and champagne glasses, Andrew's face turned pale. "Mr. Hart," the judge said, voice even but unyielding, "there is substantial evidence of misconduct, both marital and financial. This will weigh heavily in the division of assets and custody." Andrew opened his mouth to argue, but Dana leaned forward, her voice firm. "If Mr. Hart believes these messages are fabricated, we welcome a forensic review of his devices." His lawyer quickly shook his head, muttering something I couldn't catch, and Andrew fell silent. In that moment, I felt the ground tilt in my favor. Lily had been dreading the idea of testifying, but the judge spoke directly to her in chambers, asking simple questions. She told him she wanted to live with me, her voice quiet but steady. When the judge repeated her words in open court, awarding me full custody, Lily squeezed my hand so tightly I thought my bones would crack. "I don't have to go with him anymore," she whispered when we stepped into the hallway. That sentence carried more relief than any ruling could. The financial side came next, and that was where Andrew crumbled. Dana had argued that since my inheritance had funded the start of his firm, I was entitled to half its value. His partners, already eager to distance themselves, seized the chance to buy out his shares for far less than they were worth. He walked into the courtroom, thinking he still owned part of the company. He walked out with nothing. His accounts were drained, his credit cards maxed, his name no longer attached to the agency he had paraded as his empire. I watched him lean back in his chair, hollow-eyed, when the judge finalized the division. He would keep none of the property, none of the firm, and carry a stack of debts that would follow him like shadows. Even his father, who had bailed him out more times than I could count, finally turned. Richard stood in court one afternoon, his voice sharp with finality. "I can't support this anymore," he told Andrew. "You've disgraced this family. You're on your own." Andrew's face twisted, disbelief and panic mingling, but Richard didn't look back. It wasn't just Richard who stepped away. David, his younger brother, sent me a text later that week. "He doesn't deserve anything. I'm with you." For years, I had felt like an outsider in their family, always watching Andrew shine while I worked in the background. Now even they saw through him. Tessa's fall was quieter, but no less complete. With Andrew cut out of the firm, she lost her job. She tried to post online about being used and discarded, but screenshots from the gala resurfaced, showing her laughing in his arms. The comment sections tore her apart. Eventually, she disappeared from the city altogether. Milwaukee wasn't forgiving, not when the evidence was so visible. Through all of this, I focused on Lily. I found us a new house, not extravagant, but warm and filled with light. We painted her room the shade of yellow she chose, and she taped her sketches to the walls. I opened a small office for my consulting work contracts, steady enough to rebuild my career on my own terms. Each dollar I earned felt like it belonged to me, not funneled through Andrew's hands. I saw him again, only in court, each time more diminished than the last. His once tailored suits hung loosely on his frame. His voice, once filled with charm, broke under the weight of each proceeding. When the divorce was finalized, the decree left him with debts, child support, and no path back to the life he had flaunted. He didn't fight. He didn't even argue. He just slumped in his chair, staring at the table, as if admitting defeat. By the end of that month, Andrew had no home. He bounced between relatives, friends, and eventually shelters. The man who once strutted through boardrooms couldn't pay his rent or keep his car from repossession. Word traveled quickly through Milwaukee. Sightings of him hunched on park benches or slipping into temporary housing reached me through acquaintances. I didn't look for them, but the stories found me. One evening, Lily asked me where he lived now. I hesitated, wanting to protect her, but she looked at me with those clear eyes that already knew too much. "He doesn't have a home anymore," I said gently. She nodded, thoughtful, then said, "That's what happens when you lie too much. Simple, direct, and true." The victory wasn't just mine, it was survival. I had carried the weight of his choices for too long. Now every burden had been laid back at his feet. Yet, even as I rebuilt our lives, I knew this wasn't the end. The legal battles were over, but closure doesn't arrive with a signature. It waits in the small, unexpected moments when you see the person who broke you standing in the ruins they created. It happened outside a grocery store on a quiet evening when the parking lot lights hummed against the September air. My arms were full of bags when I noticed him sitting hunched on the curb near the cart return. For a moment, I didn't recognize the man I had once married. His hair was matted, his clothes stained, and his eyes carried the empty stare of someone who had been wandering too long without direction. When he saw me, his body jerked upright, almost stumbling as he scrambled to his feet. "Julia, wait!" he called out, his voice cracked and desperate. The sound made me stop, though every instinct told me to keep walking. I set the bags in the trunk of my car and closed it carefully before turning to face him. He stood a few feet away, wringing his hands, shifting from foot to foot like he couldn't decide whether to plead or shout. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he said, his words spilling out in a rush. "My dad cut me off. David won't return my calls, and nobody will hire me. Please, Julia. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your husband." The word husband felt foreign, like a title that had long since been stripped away. I shook my head slowly. "Ex-husband," I corrected. "Don't get it twisted." He flinched, as if I had struck him, but pressed on anyway. "Fine, ex-husband, but we built a life together. You can't just erase that. I know I screwed up, but can't you give me another chance?" I crossed my arms, steadying my voice. "Do you know how many chances you already had when you came home late and I believed your lies, when you made me doubt myself, when I gave up my career so you could chase your ego? You had 100 chances. Andrew and you threw away every single one." His eyes glistened, and for a second I saw a flicker of the man I used to love. "I don't know how to do this without you," he whispered. "I don't know how to be alone." Pity tugged at me, but it vanished as quickly as it came when I remembered Lily's small voice the night she told me about him and Tessa. I remembered the ballroom, the humiliation, the gaslighting. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You were never alone. You had me. You had Lily. You had a family, a business, and a home. And you burned it all down for cheap thrills and pride." His head shook violently, tears streaking down his face. "Please, Julia, I'll do anything. Therapy, rehab, whatever it takes. Just help me." I cut him off, my tone cool and final. "This isn't about therapy. This isn't about promises. This is about consequences, Andrew. And for once in your life, you're the one facing them." His shoulders slumped, the fight drained from his body. "Don't do this to me," he muttered, his voice cracking. I leaned in slightly, my eyes locked on his. "I'm not doing anything to you. You did this to yourself. You are the architect of your own destruction." His mouth opened, but no words came. He sank back down onto the curb, his head falling into his hands, a man swallowed by the ruin of his own making. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw him sitting there, hunched and broken, as I pulled away. For days afterward, the image of him on that curb lingered in my mind. Not because I missed him, but because it was the first time I saw him without his armor of charm, money, or power. Stripped bare, he was just a man who had gambled everything on arrogance and lost. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like his victim. I felt free. Life moved forward in quiet but meaningful ways. Lily and I settled deeper into our new home, the walls filling with sketches and laughter that no longer carried fear. I took on more consulting contracts, steady work that reminded me of who I had been before Andrew's ambitions overshadowed mine. Each client valued me for my skills, not for the man I had been married to. Every check deposited into my account felt like proof that I had reclaimed more than money, I had reclaimed myself. Still, news of Andrew drifted to me in fragments. A friend mentioned seeing him outside a shelter downtown, asking about odd jobs. Another said he had shown up at a networking event only to be ignored by everyone in the room. Each story painted the same picture, a man once surrounded by admirers, now reduced to whispers and avoidance. One evening, Lily sat at the table doing homework. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up suddenly, her pencil tapping against the page. "Do you think Dad will ever get better?" she asked. I chose my words carefully. "I think people only change if they want to, sweetheart. And your dad spent a long time pretending he didn't need to." She nodded, her expression thoughtful, then returned to her work. The subject never came up again. I didn't seek closure in grand gestures or public victories. It came instead in small, steady moments. The sound of Lily laughing freely. The quiet of a house that no longer felt like a battleground. The knowledge that I had faced betrayal and not only survived it, but reshaped my life into something stronger. Each day, the weight of the past lifted a little more. And yet I knew one truth remained. Andrew wasn't entirely gone. He was out there somewhere, drifting from place to place, the shadow of a man who once thought he ruled a city. He wasn't my story anymore, but his downfall wasn't finished. It had been nearly a year since that night outside the grocery store, when I left Andrew on the curb with his head in his hands. I thought that was the last time I would ever see him, but Milwaukee has a way of folding paths back together. One gray morning, while waiting for coffee at a cafe near my office, I overheard two men at the next table whispering. "That guy Hart. Saw him behind the bus station last week, sleeping in his car until the tow truck hauled it off." Their words slid into my chest like ice. I didn't turn to look at them. I just stirred my coffee and stared out the window at the rain, thinking about the man who once threw elaborate dinners to show off his wealth. Now he was reduced to rumors passed between strangers. That afternoon, I checked my messages and found one from an acquaintance. Attached was a photo Andrew sitting outside a shelter, knees pulled to his chest, wearing the same suit I had last seen hanging off him like borrowed clothes. His life had collapsed completely. Court orders had already given me everything I needed: custody of Lily, the majority of the assets, and protection for my inheritance. But there was something about seeing the photo that settled it once and for all. Andrew hadn't just lost me or the firm. He had lost his place in the world. His empire had fallen, and all that remained was the wreckage he had built with his own hands. Lily noticed the shift in me even before I said anything. One evening, while we ate dinner, she asked, "Do you still think about him?" I set down my fork and looked at her, the lamplight catching the seriousness in her young eyes. "I think about what he chose," I answered, "and how we chose something different." She nodded, chewing thoughtfully, as if she understood more than I wanted her to. A week later, Noah dropped by after his shift. He carried the scent of smoke and metal, still wearing his work jacket. We sat on the porch while Lily played inside. "Word is, Andrew's staying with an old coworker out in West Alice," he said, his voice even. "But it's not lasting. He's burned through every bridge." I listened quietly, the night air cool on my face, and finally replied, "I'm not surprised." He always thought bridges were things other people built for him to walk across. The last time I saw him in court sealed the truth of his downfall. His lawyer petitioned for a reduction in child support, claiming hardship. Andrew shuffled into the courtroom, his shoes scuffed, his face drawn tight. He avoided my gaze, avoided everyone's gaze, really. The judge listened, then shook his head. "Mr. Hart, your circumstances are the direct result of your own choices. The order stands." Andrew's lips parted like he wanted to argue, but nothing came. He just sat down, slumped and silent. When the hearing ended, I walked past him without slowing. For years I had braced myself for his words, his manipulations, his performances. But that day, he had none left. The silence between us said more than any speech. By autumn, the man who once wore tailored suits was seen begging for change outside a gas station. I didn't go looking for him, but word always found its way back. A neighbor told me she spotted him in line at a soup kitchen. Another said he had been asked to leave a networking event because no one wanted to be associated with him. Each story was a nail sealing the coffin of his old life. Meanwhile, Lily and I lived in peace. Our townhouse was filled with color, her sketches taped to the walls, fresh flowers in the kitchen books stacked beside the couch. I had clients who respected me, evenings that ended in quiet laughter instead of tense silence, and mornings that began without dread. The contrast between our home and the stories I heard about Andrew couldn't have been sharper. One night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me and asked softly, "Is Dad gone? Forever?" I brushed her hair back from her forehead and kissed her temple. "He's not gone," I told her gently. "He's just not part of our story anymore." She smiled faintly, turned on her side, and drifted to sleep. I stood there in the doorway, realizing she was finally free of his shadow, just as I was. Andrew's world had collapsed piece by piece, his business, his reputation, his family, even his home. By the time winter came, he was a ghost, in Milwaukee glimpsed only in whispers and fleeting sightings. And I understood something I hadn't before. My revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was patient, precise, and permanent. It has been more than a year since I last saw Andrew's face in a courtroom or caught his name whispered in passing. By now, he is little more than a shadow drifting through a city that once praised him. His business is gone. His family turned away. And the arrogance that used to fill every room has vanished into silence. The man who once strutted through boardrooms is now a cautionary tale, nothing more. For Lily and me, life has become something steady and good. Our townhouse is filled with small rituals, her sketches taped proudly to the fridge, the sound of music drifting from her room. The comfort of simple dinners shared without tension. I returned to my consulting work on my own terms, building a career where my skills are recognized without being tied to someone else's name. Each day feels like mine, not borrowed, not sacrificed. Noah still checks in often, and his quiet support reminds me of the importance of family that shows up when it matters most. Dana moved on to other clients, but I know I will always remember how she gave me the tools to fight for myself when I needed them. Even Richard and David, who once admired Andrew without question, no longer speak his names. The spell he held over them is broken, replaced with a weary acceptance of who he really was. Elaine sent me a letter months ago, written in careful handwriting, apologizing for not seeing the truth sooner. I don't hold bitterness toward her. In the end, Andrew deceived them all, just as he deceived me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing not to carry anger any longer. And for my own peace, I chose to let it go. The greatest change, though, is in Lily. She is lighter, more certain of her place in the world. She doesn't flinch at raised voices, and she no longer whispers her worries in the dark. She has seen what it looks like to stand firm, and she knows betrayal does not define love. Watching her grow without fear has been the truest measure of my own healing. Sometimes, late at night, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and think back to the woman I used to be, the one who overlooked the late nights, who handed over her inheritance, who believed silence was strength. That version of me is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who learned that dignity is not given by others, but held from within. Andrew thought he was taking everything from me when he chose betrayal. Instead, he gave me the key to my freedom. Betrayal is painful, yes, but it also clears the path for something stronger. I walked through that fire, and I came out the other side, unburned, wiser, and finally, free. Before we close, I would love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your reflections in the comments, and if stories of quiet justice bring you comfort, you'll always find them here.